Did you know that 46% of your procrastination tendency is genetic? Or that your brain's limbic system actively fights against your best intentions by seeking immediate dopamine hits instead of delayed rewards? Picture this. You sit down to work on an important project, but somehow find yourself scrolling through social media an hour later. Sound familiar? These brain mechanics explain why many of us struggle despite our best intentions. The science reveals why simply trying harder rarely works for overcoming procrastination. This video explains the neurological battle happening inside your head and gives you a practical 3-step interruption method that works with your brain's wiring. Stay tuned to discover why willpower alone isn't the answer. Why your brain loves to lie about time. Have you ever told yourself, "I'll have more time tomorrow," only to find tomorrow just as busy? It's a familiar promise we make when postponing tasks. This magical future where our schedules clear up and motivation flows freely. Yet somehow, that ideal tomorrow never actually arrives. This is temporal self-deception, a fascinating psychological phenomenon where our brains systematically misjudge future time availability. We create optimistic fantasies about tomorrow that bear little resemblance to reality, like a faulty timer that consistently underestimates how long the cooking process will take. Research from the Journal of Behavioral Decision-Making reveals we systematically underestimate task duration by 40 to 60%. That report you think needs 2 hours? It probably requires closer to 3 or 4. That website update you've allocated a day for? You might need the entire week. This dramatic miscalculation forms a consistent pattern in how our brains process future time. Psychologists call this the planning fallacy. First identified by Nobel Prize-winning researcher Daniel Kahneman, it describes our tendency to believe future tasks will take less time than similar past tasks actually took. We make these predictions despite having concrete evidence to the contrary from our own experiences. This is why every time we underestimate our tasks, history repeats itself. Think about the last time you worked on a major presentation. How long did you predict it would take versus how long it actually took? Most of us would admit our prediction was wildly optimistic. Yet the next time we face a similar presentation, we make the same optimistic prediction, dismissing our previous experience. This time distortion also affects how we remember past procrastination episodes. Studies from the University of Toronto show we remember past procrastination as far less stressful than it actually was. Your brain runs a selective memory program, downplaying the anxiety you felt when racing to meet a deadline or the embarrassment of submitting rushed work. By the time you're facing the next task, those emotional warnings have been erased from your working memory. When we examine present bias, our brain's tendency to value immediate rewards far more than future benefits, the picture becomes clearer. Neuroimaging studies show our brain's reward centers activate intensely for immediate rewards. When considering the same reward delayed into the future, that neural activity drops dramatically. We see this in everyday decisions. When choosing between scrolling social media now versus working on a project with future payoff, our brains evaluate these options unequally. The immediate dopamine hit from checking Instagram creates a stronger neural response than the abstract future benefit of completing your project. When you're choosing between starting that report and watching one more YouTube video, you're making a neurologically imbalanced decision. Your brain experiences these options differently, heavily weighting immediate pleasure over future reward. This temporal misjudgment occurs regardless of education level, intelligence, or awareness of the planning fallacy. Even experts fall into this trap when estimating time for tasks in their domain of expertise. Neuroscientists at Princeton have discovered that when we think about our future selves, our brains show activity patterns similar to when we think about strangers. Your brain processes future you as almost a different person, someone with more time, more discipline, and more motivation than present you. This creates a perfect environment for procrastination. When you postpone a task, you're passing it to this future you, a person your brain doesn't fully identify with, making it easier to burden them with your current responsibilities. There's also an evolutionary angle. For most of human history, immediate threats and opportunities were more relevant to survival than long-term planning. Our ancestors needed to respond to predators, find food, and secure shelter, all immediate concerns. This evolutionary wiring remains despite our modern environment requiring more long-term planning. Why do we continue deceiving ourselves about procrastination? Our brains prioritize present comfort over future benefits, creating elaborate false narratives about time availability to justify these choices. This self-deception allows us to feel better about choices that prioritize immediate comfort, even when those choices conflict with long-term goals. What makes this challenging is that our rational mind knows these stories are false. You're aware that tomorrow will likely be just as busy as today. You recognize that starting earlier would reduce stress. Yet this intellectual awareness often isn't enough to override the powerful psychological mechanisms driving procrastination. Traditional productivity advice often assumes rational time decisions based on accurate forecasting. But understanding temporal self-deception shows why willpower and scheduling apps aren't enough. We're fighting against fundamental cognitive biases that distort time perception. Effective procrastination strategies must account for these biases. Rather than expecting perfect time estimation, we need systems that compensate for predictable temporal misjudgments. This might include automatically doubling time estimates, creating implementation intentions, or using pre-commitment strategies that lock in decisions before temporal biases take effect. The neurological battle in your brain. That self-deception around time isn't happening in isolation. It's the symptom of a much deeper neurological conflict. While we blame ourselves for lacking willpower, neuroscience reveals something far more interesting. Two distinct brain regions literally fighting for control over your behavior, with fundamentally opposing priorities and different levels of evolutionary development. What if procrastination isn't your fault, but the result of an actual war happening inside your brain? Neuroimaging studies have captured this battle in real time. When you face a challenging task, two major neural systems activate simultaneously with competing agendas, like a neurological tug-of-war where each side pulls in opposite directions. In one corner, we have the limbic system, the emotional center of your brain that we explored in Section 2. This ancient neural network processes emotions such as fear and anxiety, designed to seek pleasure and avoid pain immediately. It's impulsive, reactive, and completely unconcerned with your long-term goals or deadlines. In the opposing corner stands your prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of your brain, located just behind your forehead. This is your brain's rational command center, responsible for executive functions like decision-making, planning, and impulse control. Unlike your limbic system, the prefrontal cortex can envision future consequences and delay gratification. These two neural systems have fundamentally different objectives when facing a challenging task. Your limbic system evaluates tasks purely on emotional terms. Does this feel good or bad right now? If a task triggers feelings of boredom, anxiety, or frustration, your limbic system treats these emotions as threats to be avoided. When you postpone starting that important project, it's because your limbic system has identified something unpleasant about the task. Perhaps it seems overwhelming, tedious, or carries the risk of failure. In response, the amygdala activates, steering you toward immediate relief. Checking social media, watching videos, or any activity that provides instant gratification. Your prefrontal cortex operates on an entirely different timeline. It weighs long-term benefits against short-term discomfort, allowing you to push through temporary unpleasantness for greater future rewards. While your limbic system focuses exclusively on the present moment, your prefrontal cortex projects into the future, seeing the consequences of procrastination and the benefits of taking action now. But there's a critical disadvantage that tips the scales in this neural battle. Your prefrontal cortex requires significantly more energy to function than your limbic system. It's like comparing a modern electric vehicle to an old gas guzzler. One is more sophisticated but demands more resources to operate. This energy demand creates a vulnerability. When you're mentally fatigued, stressed, or sleep-deprived, your prefrontal cortex loses power first. The rational part of your brain runs on a rechargeable battery that depletes throughout the day, while your emotional limbic system operates on a more consistent and primitive energy supply. Picture this. It's 4 p.m. at the office, and you've been in meetings all day. You finally sit down to complete that important quarterly report due tomorrow. As you stare at the empty document, you feel an overwhelming urge to check emails or browse news headlines instead. This isn't random behavior. It's your tired prefrontal cortex losing the battle to your limbic system, which seeks the immediate relief of distraction over the delayed reward of task completion. Research shows that as mental fatigue increases, the prefrontal cortex's ability to override emotional impulses diminishes significantly. This explains why procrastination often worsens later in the day or during periods of high stress. Your brain's rational governor is literally running out of fuel, allowing the limbic system to dominate decision-making. Brain imaging studies confirm this neurological power struggle. When procrastinators face challenging tasks, researchers observe increased activity in the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, while the prefrontal regions show reduced activation compared to non-procrastinators. The neurochemical dopamine plays a central role in this conflict as well. When you complete a task, your brain releases dopamine, creating a sense of satisfaction. However, procrastinators often struggle with this process. They delay tasks and miss out on the rewards associated with completion. Instead, the procrastinating brain learns to seek dopamine through easier routes, the immediate pleasure of distraction rather than the delayed satisfaction of accomplishment. Each time you choose the quick dopamine hit of checking messages over working on a challenging project, you strengthen the neural pathways that lead to procrastination. This is why procrastination feels less like a conscious choice and more like being pulled by an invisible force toward distraction. When your limbic system takes control, it genuinely feels easier to postpone the task than to push through discomfort. You're experiencing the result of an actual neurological tug-of-war. This neurological understanding explains why traditional anti-procrastination advice often fails. Telling yourself to just do it or try harder doesn't address the underlying neural conflict. You're fighting against powerful brain systems that evolved over millions of years. The specific pathways in your brain linked to procrastination are involved in decision-making, motivation, and self-control. Procrastinators often have difficulty activating these pathways, leading to task delays. This isn't a character flaw. It's a particular pattern of brain activation that can be modified with the right approach. Procrastination versus laziness, the critical difference. Understanding the neurological battle in our brains raises an important question that few of us stop to consider. Could the lazy label you've been giving yourself actually be making your procrastination worse? Science suggests these seemingly interchangeable behaviors actually stem from fundamentally different psychological roots, and confusing them might be sabotaging your attempts to change. Let's clear up a common misconception right away. Procrastination and laziness are not the same thing, though we often use these terms interchangeably in everyday conversation. This distinction has profound implications for how we understand and overcome procrastination. When we look at behavioral patterns, procrastinators often work harder overall than non-procrastinators due to last-minute cramming. Think about your own experience. That night before a deadline, when you frantically completed an assignment, heart racing, fingers typing furiously until 3 a.m. That intense burst of activity demonstrates procrastination, not laziness. Procrastinators typically compress their work into shorter time frames, producing lower quality results despite greater effort. The key difference between procrastination and laziness lies in the active choice element. Procrastination involves deliberately choosing alternative activities despite knowing there will be negative consequences. When you scroll through social media instead of writing that report, you're making an active choice to engage in something else. Laziness, by contrast, is characterized by a general lack of activity or motivation to engage in any task. The procrastinator who cleans their entire apartment instead of studying for an exam isn't exhibiting laziness. They're being productive, just not at the task that matters most. Procrastinators typically experience higher levels of stress and anxiety than non-procrastinators. This emotional burden comes from the awareness of what they should be doing, coupled with the discomfort of not doing it. The procrastinator feels the weight of unfulfilled obligations and experiences guilt, shame, and anxiety, emotional states largely absent in simple laziness. Consider Sarah, who regularly calls herself lazy when she puts off important work projects. Each time she uses this label, she feels worse about herself, creating a shame spiral that makes focusing even harder. The next time she faces a challenging task, the memory of past failures intensifies her anxiety, making procrastination even more likely. What Sarah doesn't realize is that her problem isn't laziness, it's emotional regulation. Research shows procrastination is often linked to perfectionism, essentially the opposite of laziness. The perfectionist procrastinator delays starting tasks because they fear not performing them well enough. When you put off writing that important email because you're worried about finding exactly the right words, that's perfectionism-driven procrastination, not laziness. Consider high-achieving individuals who struggle with procrastination. Leonardo da Vinci took 16 years to complete the Mona Lisa, working on it sporadically while juggling multiple other projects. Successful modern entrepreneurs, academics, and creatives produce significant work, yet still battle procrastination tendencies. These examples highlight that procrastination can coexist with high achievement and productivity. The distinction becomes even more important when we consider the neurological components. Procrastination involves specific neural pathways related to emotional regulation. When faced with a task that triggers negative emotions, boredom, anxiety, frustration, or fear of failure, the procrastinator's brain activates avoidance mechanisms to escape the uncomfortable feelings. This is why labeling yourself as lazy when you procrastinate is potentially harmful. Such self-labeling reinforces negative self-perception as nothing to address the actual emotional regulation issue at the heart of procrastination. The shame created by this negative self-talk often leads to more procrastination as you attempt to avoid additional negative feelings. At its core, procrastination is fundamentally an emotional regulation problem related to avoiding negative feelings associated with certain tasks. It's about managing discomfort. Each time you procrastinate, you're making a short-term mood repair, trading immediate relief for future stress and poorer outcomes. This emotional component explains why traditional productivity advice often fails procrastinators. Tips like just start or make a better schedule don't address the underlying emotional dynamics driving the behavior. When we misidentify procrastination as laziness, we apply the wrong solutions. Strategies designed to increase motivation or energy won't resolve an emotional regulation problem. The self-regulation failure that characterizes procrastination explains why many high-functioning, motivated individuals still struggle with it. This realization can be liberating. Your procrastination isn't a character flaw or moral failing, but a specific behavioral pattern with identifiable triggers. Understanding procrastination as an emotional regulation issue rather than laziness changes everything about how we approach solutions. Effective interventions must address the emotional components driving procrastination behavior. Learning to recognize, accept, and work with uncomfortable emotions becomes crucial to overcoming procrastination patterns. This perspective shift allows for greater self-compassion and creates space for constructive change. Success isn't just about completing more tasks in less time. It's about developing better emotional regulation strategies and creating conditions that reduce avoidance behaviors. The surprising statistics: you're not alone. Now that we've distinguished between procrastination and laziness, let's confront a surprising truth. This struggle you're facing is remarkably universal. Those emotional regulation strategies we just explored are so crucial because procrastination isn't your personal failing. It's wired into human psychology at a fundamental level. Would it shock you to learn that a staggering 95% of college students admit to procrastinating, with a substantial 50% doing so consistently and chronically? Imagine this. It's 11 p.m. You have a paper due tomorrow, and instead of typing that conclusion paragraph, you're organizing your desk drawers or scrolling through social media. The anxiety builds, yet something keeps you from tackling the task. This scenario plays out in dorm rooms and apartments across the country every night. When we look at the general population, approximately 1 in 5 adults identifies as a chronic procrastinator. That's 20% of all adults. People from all walks of life fighting this same battle with task avoidance and emotional regulation. What makes these statistics particularly revealing is their consistency across different demographics and achievement levels. Procrastination doesn't discriminate based on intelligence, ambition, or capability. The emotional regulation challenges that drive procrastination affect people across vastly different professions and skill sets. This prevalence reveals something profound about procrastination. It's a universal human tendency rooted in how our brains process discomfort. Perhaps even more fascinating is what research tells us about the genetic component of procrastination. Twin studies have revealed that approximately 46% of procrastination tendencies can be attributed to genetic factors. This biological predisposition interacts with your environment in complex ways. If you grew up with parents who modeled last-minute rushes or attended schools that rewarded cramming, these environmental factors likely amplified your genetic tendencies. Conversely, structured environments with consistent routines might have helped mitigate inherited procrastination traits. This genetic component helps explain why some people seem to naturally resist procrastination while others fight an uphill battle. Your tendency to postpone tasks is influenced by inherited traits that affect how your brain processes tasks, manages emotions, and responds to discomfort. Understanding this genetic influence provides a scientific foundation for approaching procrastination with greater self-compassion. College environments create a perfect storm for procrastination behaviors. The academic setting, with its long-term deadlines, competing priorities, and high-pressure evaluations, creates fertile ground for procrastination to flourish. These environments demand precisely the emotional regulation skills that procrastinators struggle with. This concentration of procrastination in academic settings doesn't mean students are less disciplined than others. Instead, it suggests that certain environments can exacerbate procrastination tendencies that exist within most of us. The same person who procrastinates on term papers might be perfectly punctual in contexts where different emotional triggers are present. Our digital landscape has amplified procrastination tendencies across the board. The rise of constant connectivity has created new challenges for emotional regulation. Our devices provide immediate access to alternatives that deliver instant gratification. Social media, entertainment, news feeds, all just a tap away when we face a challenging task. These digital platforms are specifically engineered to capture your attention through psychological mechanisms that target the same limbic system we discussed earlier. The notifications, likes, and endless scrolling features exploit your brain's preference for immediate rewards, making it increasingly difficult to choose delayed gratification in the form of productive work. As our connectivity has increased, so have procrastination rates across various demographic groups. This isn't coincidental. It's a predictable outcome of surrounding ourselves with powerful distractions designed to be as compelling as possible. Your struggle isn't happening in a vacuum. It's occurring in perhaps the most distraction-rich environment humans have ever inhabited. What's particularly interesting is what procrastination research reveals about high achievers. Many successful individuals don't avoid procrastination entirely. They procrastinate selectively and strategically. Some research suggests that certain forms of procrastination may serve creative processes by allowing ideas to incubate, though this benefit typically comes with costs that outweigh the advantages. Many accomplished writers, artists, and scientists report working on important but less urgent tasks to avoid the most pressing ones. While not ideal, this approach channels procrastination energy into productive alternatives rather than pure avoidance.